He had to actually learn how to learn because he didn't have the skill sets that most of us have. We can help so many people learn tools and strategies, but that doesn't mean they'll be able to follow through and do it. So we're going to talk about why today.
Makes sense.
Great morning, world. Great morning, humans. This is your boy, Dr. J.C. Dornick, and welcome to another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. J.C. podcast. So today's topic is one that is very, very connected to everything that I'm saying. And the purpose of these Mondays, now that you know kind of selfishly what it's for, is just to give you an opportunity to do what most people will not do today. Most people are going to wake up and allow their program to dictate their day. They're going to let their day dictate their day. And we'll get into that. And that's not a great way to live. That's a reactive way to live. And if you learn from what we speak about in the Make Sense, the book that we just published, you know, the way we look at things and the way we react to things, you know, has been, for the most part, programmed and persuaded and conditioned into our minds our whole life. So if we're just handing the keys of trust over to our automatic reaction stress response system, rather than taking control as the dominant force and shot caller of our day, well, you probably can predict what kind of results you're going to get. So that's the process of making sense, by the way. You know, I don't know about you, but when I don't understand something, I start asking questions until I go, aha, now I understand. Today's topic is called Stop Managing Time and Start Managing This Instead. So we're going to go over something that we call the night before rule. And we're going to talk about claiming authority over your mood. We're going to talk about mood management today. And God, I just owe so much of my life. I might even tell you that I owe just being here in general to my ability throughout the years to get better and better, never perfect, at managing my mood. So here's what this is going to be about today. We're going to talk about stopping the idea of letting our environment dictate our results. We spoke a little bit about that in the beginning. We're going to learn how to claim authority over our mental state and build, from my book, an interface response system that actually works. We're going to talk a lot about how we can teach so many tools. We can help so many people learn tools and strategies, but that doesn't mean they'll be able to follow through and do it. So we're going to talk about why today. So in this episode, I'm going to explain why productivity is not always a time management problem. We get very enveloped in time blocking and time management. It's actually a state management problem, or I should say it might be. It could also be. So we're going to unpack how the night before rule, which I'll teach you, determines whether you wake up reactive or intentional. So park that for a second and just decide, have you decided to be reactive or intentional this day? Or have you already begun the process of being reactive? Or did you make a decision to be intentional? But what is your stance right now? And we're going to talk about why borrowing happiness from tomorrow sabotages our success, and how mastering your internal environment makes you truly unfuckwithable in 2026. That's one of my chapters. I have a chapter in my book about becoming unfuckwithable. And that is about having agility. That's about resilience. That's about perseverance. But what it's mostly about is setting yourself up for that state. Because when you decide to be unfuckwithable, it doesn't mean that the fucking is going to stop, right? It just means that you're deciding what it's going to mean to you, which is the only thing that you have a decision in. So you can have the best strategy in the world. We spoke about this. You could have the best business plan, the best productivity system, the best calendar structure. But if you wake up reactive, I'm going to teach you how to stop doing that, tired, emotionally scattered, and already behind the starting line, that strategy means nothing. It becomes almost worthless. I always say that learning and knowing is nothing more than a distraction in the absence of action. So if we decide that we're going to do something because we learned it at a seminar or a podcast or we read a book and we don't follow through, it's typically not that you can't do it. It's that you didn't work on the who first. It's who you are that determines how well what you do works. So the problem is your state very often, or your mood. If you peel it back, that's the precursor. So today we're going to go deep, and we're going to go deeper than your typical productivity hacks. So if you're looking for productivity hacks, you'll get a couple today, but we're going to go deeper. We're going to peel it back a little bit further and work on the thing that is really, really predicating your ability to do it. So we're talking about internal environment authority here today. The discipline of managing your mental state before the noisy world starts influencing it. So we're going to talk about some morning routine, but also evening routine, because here's the real takeaway today, everybody. And this represents one of the major tenets in the Make Sense ecosystem, and that is this. This is probably one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned, and I'm paying it forward to you. So here's one of the most important things that I have ever learned, and one of two tenets of the Make Sense ecosystem. Who you are determines how well what you do works. So most people believe that their mood is something that simply happens to them. Isn't that an interesting thing? They wake up in the morning and they say things like, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm not feeling good today. I didn't sleep well last night. You know what? I didn't sleep well last night, but I didn't use that as a platform this morning. Sometimes people say today's already off, but here's the truth, that high performers eventually learn. And when I say high performers, I'm not separating you from other people when I say that. That's an important distinction right there. A high performer is just somebody that's learned how to become unfuckwithable and set up their mood and manage their mood. So don't ever think that you're separated from the potential of being a high performer. There's a high performer version of you. So when I say high performers have eventually learned that mood is not a condition. Now that's pretty controversial to say mood is not a condition, because when you're in a bad mood, don't you kind of feel like it's a condition? It's actually a managed state. And that means that you have a say in your mood. So the next time you find yourself in a good mood or a bad mood, just contemplate and entertain the fact that you had a say in that. And that in turn means that your day is up to you. So Hal Elrod was really the pioneer of the morning. He wrote a book called The Miracle Morning, which I read, and that played a big role in me coming up with what I call my great morning rise up. And, he just said, win the morning, win the day. And that's what he meant by it. It's up to you. You have a say. So the people that accomplish extraordinary things in the world, which there's a version of you that does that, you might be in that state right now, whether it be business, leadership, health, relationships, are rarely the most talented people. In fact, if you read books about successful people, you'll see that they very often tell stories that they had to work harder than everybody else. I mean, my great friend, Jim Quick, who's enormously successful, was the boy with the broken brain. He had to actually learn how to learn because he didn't have the skill sets that most of us had. So think about that. They're rarely the most talented. They're simply the ones who learned how to manage their internal environment before the world gets a chance to manage it for them. I talk very often about the game of life, and I have a chapter in my book called Decoding the Game. I like to look at life and gamify it. I don't know about you. It's fun. And one of the things that I can do when I gamify it is be the game player. But sometimes if you wake up in the wrong state and you don't handle your mood management the right way, you might think you're playing the game, but the game ends up playing you. Make sense? So I want you to think about your internal environment. So this is something that I got from, I'm going to talk about mood management here. And I didn't come up with this idea. I knew the concept of it, but I never called it mood management until I started reading books from Arthur Brooks. Arthur Brooks, fantastic author. He's a happiness researcher. And what he teaches us extensively is that happiness isn't something that we chase. Think about that for a second. Happiness is not like a destination. It's not like an accomplishment that we chase. It's something that we manage intelligently. So this is about becoming the dominant force and shot caller of your day and managing things intelligently. Now, that doesn't mean that you're stupid if you're not managing things intelligently. It might mean that you just don't know. So what we're going to accomplish today is you're going to know, but what happens next is either you just keep going or you start growing. So Brooks describes happiness as a combination of enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. So that's what he equates happiness to. But those things didn't just show up automatically. Okay. We think that they do. This is what's interesting about the human condition and how we wake up in the morning. It's almost as if we learned to wake up at some point and see if it's gonna be a good day. It's like we take our finger and we put it up and we say, is this a good day? Like the day is going to let you know. Well, here's the thing. If you do use that strategy, the day will let you know. States like enjoyment, satisfaction, meaning show up, and then you're going to learn how to regulate your emotional state after they show up. Now, that's a sticky game to play if you think about it. If I wake up in the morning and I make an assessment of the day before I claim control of it, well, what's going to happen is the day's going to look very similar to an element that was worrisome, challenging, or, hard the day before, because your brain boots up like a computer. And when your computer boots up, just like this computer I'm looking at here or this phone, it doesn't boot up anything new. It boots up what you were using last. Your brain works the same way. So in other words, mood management is the foundation of happiness, productivity, and clarity. So let's talk about the real productivity program. So most people try to improve their lives by managing time. I know this because I teach time blocking, and time management is a big, big thing. Get organized, manage your time. So we learn things like that. And there's so many different courses on time blocking, the latest productivity apps, and we make to-do lists and task lists. You know why most people don't have to-do lists in their pocket? Is because they tried it and they didn't follow through. So there's a lot of great strategies and there's a lot of great books on strategies, but productivity is not primarily a time management problem. And that's what we're talking about here. It's actually a state management problem because your emotional state is chaotic. Or I'm sorry, not is. If your emotional state is chaotic, overwhelmed, reactive, or drained, everything becomes harder. Am I right? So if my emotional state has those elements, it's chaotic, it's overwhelmed, stressed. I told you before about my struggles with anxiety. It wouldn't go away in the morning, but if my emotional state is like that, the things that we're talking about doing become harder. So doesn't it make sense right now to consider going and working on your emotional state before? And it's just so fascinating how we just assume that the day will fall into place without taking care of our mood. Isn't that interesting? So even simple tasks begin to feel heavy. Decision making becomes harder. Creativity becomes harder. Writer's block, by the way, as somebody that writes every day, has a lot to do with my emotional state and my mood. So before I sit down to write, I do some other things that I need to. So like if exercise, for example, if drinking water and listening to a positive podcast or listening to some music or meditating or exercise gets you in a better emotional state, wouldn't it make sense to do the tasks that will be easier to do, like react to adversity and things like that after you've gotten in the right emotional state? So decision making becomes harder, creativity harder, relationships harder to navigate. Anybody relate to that? And like I said, even the simplest of tasks become difficult. Now, I can tell you honestly, I drove all day yesterday and I didn't sleep last night. And we've also got a lot of challenging personal things going on. We've got a very close friend of the family dying, and we've got some sick parents, and we've got a lot of stuff going on. So my emotional state is already taxed. So I can't afford to go through my sleep habits and my morning routine and rely on those. I wouldn't have made it here today. Now, even though I did everything perfectly and I made it here today, I still have a little bit of that emotional state. But what I can tell you is that we're almost 20 minutes into being together and I feel better. My emotional state is feeling better. So I've figured out something that helps me with my emotional state while I'm in action, and that is speaking to you. Let's use that as an example. So Alexei Zaitsev from Substack is saying he worries that his gym is not going to be fun, so he stops. So if that is the case, and that's an interesting way to look at it, then you would need to do something to get rid of that worry before you look at the gym. So I would do something in the morning to get me in a state where I wouldn't look at it that way. I would see it clearly and say, hey, everything points to and proves that the gym is going to make me feel better. And if you go to the gym enough, you'll have proof. You know, anytime I've never walked out of the gym feeling bad, ever. It's like Prozac, right? So have you ever felt like just doing nothing? Isn't that interesting? You know, I just feel like doing nothing today. I need a day off. Those are those simple tasks that sometimes get tough. And that's because your mood directly influences your perception of reality. So when somebody states, I feel like doing nothing today, can you hear in those statements that there's a perception of reality? So if I wake up and I think that the day is dreary and it's going to be a tough day, I might be more prone to saying something like that because my perception of reality is tainted because I didn't take command of it. So we're entertaining the idea here of getting more enjoyment from not taking a day off of life, but from taking a day on. And I love that idea. I always make a decision in the morning to take a day on. So when you're centered in life, when you're centered and clear, challenges look like opportunities. That's what's interesting about somebody that is kicking ass in life is they will claim that they enjoy the suck. They enjoy the hard things. It's like a joy for them to do it. And that's because things look differently when you're centered and you're clear. So we're talking about getting centered and clear before we do things. It's almost like the challenges in life. And I have this feeling right now. It's a lot of hard things that I have ahead of me today. The challenges in life look like training reps, you know, and they're training reps for building personal growth. So when you're deregulated, though, or dysregulated, those same challenges or even easier ones can feel like threats or impossibilities when you're dysregulated. So we're talking about getting regulated first, which is exactly why in my book, I teach the interface response system and why it becomes so powerful. You know, when we decide to make an assessment of our brain and our thoughts and understand and embrace where all those thoughts came from, our mother, father, teacher, preacher, the programmed and conditioned nature of the brain, that's step one. So when I do that in the morning and I know that all of the thoughts and feelings that I'm having, just like my heart beats, my brain thinks, I don't have to buy into them. I don't have to participate with them and make them my identity. I can just observe them and pause them. Step two of the interface response system. I say, okay, great. Got all that. But I'm going to do something. I'm going to go into action right now, and I'm going to decide the way things are going to be. So that's what the interface response system is for and why it's such a powerful thing to learn. If you read my book, once again, and you join our free mastermind on those topics, that stuff's going to become on autopilot. That's a good autopilot to have, to allow yourself to dispute and contemplate things. But there's a more important part of all of this. If your internal environment is dysregulated, like I said, and chaotic, I could give you the interface response system. Once again, I could give you a tool and a strategy, but it's going to be much more difficult to run. So back to what you said, Alexei, I could say, here, Alexei, go to the gym. It's going to make you feel better. But if your emotional state is off and it's harder for you to get to the gym, well, now you have to have grit and you have to work harder. And that's difficult for people. But if you can get yourself in the right emotional state and manage your mood prior to looking at that task, it's not going to be harder. So for me to run the interface response system and say, when somebody comes at me or criticizes me or something doesn't go my way, it's easy and it's fun because for me, it looks like training. It looks like building muscle in my life. So your perception gets distorted or even shut down when you're emotionally dysregulated. So your pause capabilities, your ability to say, okay, I hear you, what you're saying, but you're going to put it on pause, cognitively distance yourself from the stimulus that happened and your knee-jerk reaction. Your perception gets distorted or even shut down, and your pause capabilities weaken. Your processing becomes emotional. Think about what that means. If I stop myself and I go, well, what do I actually think? But I'm still emotional about something, and I start to process things, my emotions are going to dictate a lot of what I think. So we got to get that stuff under control. And what happens is, it's an interesting thing when you process things from an emotional state. That's why in my relationship with my wife, if one of us is like has heightened emotions about something, we try our best to say, hey, let's table this for another time. I don't think I'm in the right state for this conversation. And we try to respect that decision. If not, what will happen is you can pose something that is perfectly logical, and the other person will say something. I call those, they turn into what's called yeah buts. They'll say, yeah, but they'll say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but. So if you think about it, when you bring your butt into an equation, what's happening? You're emotional. You're emotional and you're letting it dictate it. So mood management stabilizes the operating system of the interface response system. It stabilizes the operating system that the interface response system and your whole perception and reaction system runs on. And if you don't do that, that's why you're out there trying so hard to do things and not getting anywhere. So it's the difference between reactively living and intentionally living. So there's essentially two ways that people move through life, and that's you and I. We're either moving through life reactively or intentionally. So reactive living means that your environment your environment is determining everything. Okay. And there's no intentions in it. That's what reactive living means. It means that you are living in reaction to your environment. You wait for the environment to tell you things. So reactive living is thoughtless, right? And it's thoughtless because you're just letting your operating system do the job. You're handing the keys of trust over to your operating system, which we know is not really ours. It's what we've acquired from experiences in life. That's great, but it's also been programmed and persuaded and conditioned into our minds from our programmers, our mother, father, teacher, preacher. So we can't hand the keys of trust over to that and expect to get a great result. Could be a stressful email that you get that ruins your mood, traffic maybe, a bad comment can ruin your mood and your focus. So your state is constantly being pushed around by circumstances. That's what it means to be, if you're reactively living, you're a victim of circumstances and hoping that the circumstances get better before you get better. Your circumstances change when you change. And that's called intentional living. So intentionally living flips the equation. You decide the emotional baseline that you bring to the day. You decide the emotional baseline. You could say it out loud. And from that centered place, circumstances become things that you respond to versus react. And the difference between reacting and responding is there's a thought process that goes on with logic and rationale in connection with your greatest desires. So circumstances become things that you respond to, not things that control you. Nothing controls you when you decide to respond versus react, because it means that you have a say in it. So that's called mental sovereignty. All right. Well, you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week. Tune into the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. If you want to learn how to start or ramp up or monetize your podcast like I've done from A to Z, consider checking out the Dragonfly Flight Academy. You can just reach out and say, hey, I want to find out about the Flight Academy through any of our channels. We've got our wonderful Make Sense Substack, which is a daily newsletter for the inner circle, the paid subscribers. And then we have our once a week Echoes of newsletter for the free subscription. And we've got our YouTube channel, all of that stuff. So come enjoy and join the Make Sense ecosystem, and stop going through life and start growing through life. Love and appreciate you. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye now.
Makes sense.